Welcome back to the DSR channel. I'm going to do a quick step back in time to the August Unearthed Arcana because the Dark Sun campaign setting is my favorite. I loved it in second edition. I bought every book, and I had given up for years, any hope that they were going to reprint it for fifth edition. And then the Scion UA came along earlier this year in May, if I recall correctly, and Psionics is core to Dark Sun. So I had hope, maybe they're gonna do a Dark Sun um, campaign, bring the campaign setting back, and then in August they did Apocalyptic Subclasses, which is straight up Dark Sun. Um, Several of them are themed right out of core concepts from the Dark Sun. In fact, all four of them are themed right out of core concepts of the Dark Sun. So it seems very, very likely they're bringing Dark Sun back, which is awesome. I am giddy with excitement. This is my favorite campaign setting. So I want to go back and do a quick analysis of this content from the August, because that UA came out just a few weeks before I launched my first video for this channel, and I still want to do them. And I'm hoping that they're going to do a revision on it, and I want to be able to get this done so that I can do a comparison between the two. And I apologize, calendar math is hard. Today is actually the end of week 7 of the channel, and we hit 325. Amazing. Thank you all so much for the support. This is great. Putting me just one step closer to my goals. And you know what? Hey, maybe for week 8, let's shoot for the goal of 500. Can we reach 500? That'll be even more than we gained this week. So I appreciate everybody, supporting, liking, sharing, commenting. That's awesome. Okay, so first up, this is the Circle of Preservation Druid subclass, which is interesting. So you can see here these are the notes from the designers on how they wanted to build this, and you can see that there's a theme of being a support role here, which they do a good job of leaning into. So kudos for them on adding a function to the Druid that they're Druids are pretty good support, but this makes them full on A rank support. So that's great. But it is interesting. I'm going to make bring in some commentary from the second edition lore of Dark Sun. And the interesting part is that Preservers was a title given to wizards, not druids. It was kind of metaphorically, generically applied to anybody who was trying to protect the land. And so, you could say it's not counter to the lore that you could say a druid is a preserver, but the ones who held the capital P title of preserver were wizards, because in Dark Sun there was no weave, there's no magic weave. So the only source of magic for arcane magic, or source of power for arcane magic, was you drew on life around you, and plant life was the easiest, and you could draw on, if you were really powerful, you could draw on animal life, but very few could do that. So mainly it was plant life, and that's actually the one of the causes, not solely, but one of the major causes of why it's a post-apocalyptic destroyed world is that right there. And so there are these two kinds of wizards, defilers and preservers. The defilers didn't care that they were destroying the planet, and they would just drain plant life as much as they wanted, and they were all about power and themselves, and they were selfish, right? And then the preservers were kind of these like sustainable environmental wizards, right? They still drew life from plant life and animals, but they did it gently and slowly so as not to overtax any one plant and harm it, in any way. So they were like conservationists, right? Which is cool and interesting. But yeah, that was the title. They were the preservers, not the druids. And interestingly enough, druids hated preservers. I mean, they hated all wizards because wizards are draining life, and so druids just hated all of them. Even those who were trying to be conservationists, they generally didn't get along with them. But let's get back to the druid. Okay, so and this is the intro for the Circle of Preservation Druid in the Unearthed Arcana. It says the druids of the Circle of Preservation work tirelessly to conserve natural resources and restore places once ruined by greed and exploitation. Through a combination of conservation and restorative magic, druids of this order shield and spread life across the land. The most powerful members of this order can return vitality to barren fields, transforming wastelands into thriving wildernesses once more. Cool, I like it. I think the flavor and theme is cool, and it is this kind of concept of restoration, and I actually think that Dark Sun is not swords and sorcery. I think Dark Suns is epic fantasy masquerading as swords and sorcery, because there's all these themes of environmentalism, conservationism, overcoming, slavery and other bad guys. And so I think it's actually epic fantasy, and that's one of the things I love about Dark Sun. So I love the theme that they're going for here, although I think that there is a bit of a thematic overlap with the Druid Circle of the Land, right? Because that's kind of the same idea of the Druid Circle of the Land. Um, I don't know. Mechanically, they're quite different, though. So I'll leave that at the end to try to sort out. First up, Circle of Preservation spells. So these are the spells you get automatically. And it is a nice mix of spells you would already have access to on the Druid spell list and spells you don't have access to. But they are all very thematic too. So, and the spells that are already on the Druid spell list, I would have prepared a lot of these anyway. So I'm not too mad, or not mad at all, about getting them for free. A couple of them are very circumstantial. Hallow, protection from poison. The rest are I would cast on a regular basis, especially Bless. I mean, Bless is a great support spell. So love having that one, and like very thematic. So I think they're starting off strong. Second, Preserved Land. As a bonus action, you can expend a use of your wild shape to fill a 15-foot cube originating from a point on the ground you can see within 120 feet of yourself with revitalizing energy. The effect lasts for 1 minute until you have the incapacitated condition, are more than 120 feet away from the cube, or die. And whenever a creature, including you, ends its turn in the cube, you can grant the creature one of the following benefits. Bolster, the creature gains temporary hit points equal to 1d4 plus your druid level. Purify, you end one effect on the creature, causing it to have the frightened or poison conditions. In addition, the non-magical vegetation native to the region sprouts on the ground within the cube. This vegetation disappears when the effect ends. Kind of a flavor ribbon thing there. And as a bonus action on subsequent turns, you can move the cube up to 30 feet to another area on the ground within 120 feet of yourself. So right up, those of you who are familiar with the Twilight Cleric, yes, this is virtually identical to the Twilight Cleric's channel divinity called Twilight Sanctuary. The Twilight Cleric gets 1d6 plus their cleric level, and they end the charmed and frightened condition, whereas the Druid is frightened and poisoned condition. Now, the Twilight Sanctuary is just too overpowered. Like I allow silvery barbs, and I don't ban any content that's published by WotC. So I don't ban the Twilight Cleric, but I tried playing with it, in having players play it in my games, and after a few sessions, it's just too broken. And so I had to nerf this ability, and I gave it the same treatment as the Healing Spirit, where it has charges. So you can still do it as often as this says, but it has charges equal to your spellcasting ability modifier +1. So that's the same way the charges on the Healing Spirit spell works, which feels a little bit low actually. I wish it was a bit higher, like maybe double that for both of those things. But I wanted it to be the same because convention makes it easier to remember and use things. So I wanted it to match something else in the game. The Twilight Sanctuary is way too overpowered. Preserved Land it starts off at level 3 and is not overpowered. Actually, at level 3, it's okay. But this scales up that by tier 3, 4, this is just OP2. It's just too powerful, and they need to nerf it. So I'll talk more about that as we get there. But it actually starts off a lot less powerful than Twilight Sanctuary. You have to move it. It's a lot less area. So a 30-foot cube, sorry, a 15-foot cube, which is like 1/4 the diameter, if you apply diameter to a cube, of the sphere, right? Or less than that, because the sphere is a 30-foot radius around you, which means it actually is 13 squares across is the area of the 13 squares by 13 squares on a 5-foot grid is the area of the Twilight Sanctuary, or 65-foot diameter, right? And this is a 15-foot cube. Plus, the Twilight Sanctuary emanation moves with you as you move. So whatever your movement speed, that's how fast it moves. And you don't have to spend any additional actions to get it to move along with you or go where you want it to be. You just need to move. And it's a huge area. Preserved Land, 15-foot cube, which is frankly tiny in comparison. And you have to spend a bonus action to move it. So it's actually not at all over. It's just fine at this level. And I would say, all the way through tier 2, it's, I think, just fine too. The scaling is just too much in tier 3 and 4. And those two abilities alone, in my opinion, are enough to bring the Druid. So the Druid base class, I gave it a B as a support class. I think it's a full A in tier 1 and tier 2, and probably S tier by tier 3 and 4 as a support role. So that I like to see that it adds something to the class. That the class doesn't have or isn't as good at by default. So that's great. It's just, yeah, they need to bring it back a notch. And one final level 3 feature, Student of Preservation. Your studies have improved your understanding of the order and resilience of nature, granting you the following benefits. Frugal casting. When you cast a Druid spell, you can cast it without material components, except material components that are consumed by the spell or that have a spell cost specified in the spell. Additionally, whenever you cast a Druid spell that requires a material component that is consumed by the spell, there's a 10% chance that the component isn't consumed as part of the casting. And then finally, tool proficiency. You gain proficiency with one type of artisan tools of your choice. So let's talk tool proficiency first. This really depends on your DM. If your DM plays with downtime and magic item crafting, tool proficiency is quite valuable. It's really good. It allows you just create magic items instead of relying on what's dropped by monsters. You can just create what you need. And if the DM doesn't play with that, then it kind of relegates tool proficiency to basically a ribbon. Now, the rules as written in the 2024 Player's Handbook is that if an ability check has a valid skill and tool proficiency that qualify for it, and you are proficient in both, then you roll with proficiency and advantage. So it does have a mechanical impact, and there's some lesser known effects, like if you're proficient in carpenter's tools, which you could get with this, then that applies to trying to stealth on wooden floors, right? And that's written right in Xanathar's. So if you have carpenter proficiency and you're proficient in stealth, then you roll with advantage when you're stealthing on a wooden floor. Anyway, this is hugely DM dependent on how much value this has. And if DM doesn't play with any of those rules or doesn't play with then this is basically a ribbon, and people just forget that they have these things, which is unfortunate in my opinion. I try to make sure everything has value. If you're going to put it on your character sheet, I want it to be meaningful, even languages for your character. Okay, let's go over to frugal casting. This one is strange, and neither of these two are very thematic. They're like, there's nothing in the second edition lore or mechanics of anything that they had that would indicate that you should get another tool proficiency as a preserver, or that you had this frugal casting kind of concept. But anyway, frugal casting, I think it's a fine idea. It's kind of a ribbon. I don't like the design though, because what's going to happen is you're going to do a lot of extra dice rolling. If you remember, right, there's going to be a lot of time wasted just like, oh, hey, did you remember to do it? Oh, I forgot to do that. Let's do that, roll. And then most of the time, the roll is going to mean nothing because there's a 10% chance. You're going to roll 90% of the time you rolled for nothing. And the rest of the time, yeah, you saved a component that would have been consumed. How often is that going to be meaningful? Because there's a lot of spell components that are consumed, but they have no cost, right? And you can just get those for free out of a spell component pouch. And if that's the case, it didn't matter that you rolled for this, because you can get infinite number of those out of a spell component patch. So when it matters is when you're casting something that has a cost that's going to be consumed. And there's only a few spells that do that, and that's like Revivify, which is 300 gold, Greater Restoration, which is 500 gold, Raise Dead, which is 1,000 gold, and then Resurrection and True Resurrection, both have an increasing cost there as well. Those are the ones you're going to care about. So you're going to roll on those. First of all, you're not going to cast those very often. But you're going to roll on those, and 90% of the time it's a wasted roll, and you kind of feel like bummed about it, right? I would redesign this and say, get rid of the rolling and just say, for any material component cost, any costly material component, deduct 10 gold pieces times your druid level from the cost. So it always applies. It always has an effect. It's not going to be overwhelming, right? You're level 5 and you're casting Revivify. Well, you're going to reduce the cost of that material component by 50 gold. So you still need to pay 250. So you'll notice it. It'll feel good. It's going to feel a lot better than this, and you're going to waste a lot less time rolling wasted dice rolls. That's what I would do if you want to keep it. Otherwise, just remove this whole feature, because I don't think it's necessary for this for this subclass at all. All right, level 6. So improved preservation. Your preserved lands becomes more powerful in the following ways. Fortified protectors. While inside the cube created by your preserved land, you and your allies gain a bonus to Constitution saving throws equal to your Wisdom modifier minimum of +1. Reject desecrators. Whenever the cube created by your preserved land enters an enemy space, and whenever an enemy enters the cube or ends its turn there, that enemy makes a Wisdom saving throw against your spell save DC. On a failed save, the enemy takes 2d10 radiant damage, and its speed is halved until the end of its next turn as new growth rises to hinder it. On a successful save, the enemy takes half as much damage only. An enemy makes a save only once per turn. So this is interesting. First up, Fortified Protectors. That's interesting. It's powerful. I think it makes sense, because Constitution, it's all Constitution saving throws. So this would apply like if you're saving against poison, tend to be necromancy spells tend to have Constitution saving throws. So you'd have improved saving throws against them, which thematic and makes sense, right? They're preserving life against life draining effects. A lot of cold spells tend to do this, so I guess that makes sense too. And then, of course, there's saving throws to maintain concentration, and that would buff those as well. And that's probably the most powerful part of this, because you make those kind of saving throws all the time. So that's a pretty beefy benefit on its own right there. But not too powerful. I know some people are like, "Oh, that's too much." Like, let's stack this up against the Paladin's Aura of Protection. They give a bonus to every saving throw equal to their spellcasting modifier, which is charisma. So this is not nearly as strong as that. Same level 6. Now the only problem with that, here's the problem with this, is you have a paladin and this in the same aura, and then these things stack. But there's already that problem out there, and I think they missed their opportunity to fix it. Is frankly what the answer there is. They probably should have put in some sort of caveat into all of these kind of effects and say that they don't stack with each other. You'll have to choose one or the other. So that would have been the solution for all these, but too late for that. So I guess it is what it is. The next part, reject desecrators. This is interesting and quite powerful because of the frequency with which you can trigger it. So you moving the cube around as a bonus action on your turn can trigger it. Then it triggers again if they walk into it on their turn, or they end their turn in it. So you could be triggering this on a number of enemies, and it triggers when the area moves onto their space. So when you move the cube, it's moving across the battlefield, and as it moves across the battlefield, I'm trying not to hit my mic. As it moves across the battlefield, it can be triggering hitting creatures. Right? It doesn't have to stay in their space to trigger. It just has to enter their space. So you can hit a bunch of creatures on your turn as you just move this thing around 30 feet, just hit a bunch of them, and then leave it in a spot where they've got to walk through it again to get to your allies, your frontliners, and they're going to trigger it again. So it's not a ton of damage. It's pretty strong at level 6, but the damage doesn't scale, and that's probably a good thing because this is quite powerful. But still, you're talking 11 damage on average to every creature, like twice per round potentially. So 22 damage per round, and this doesn't take concentration. This will stack with other effects like this. So if you've got a cleric in your party who's got Spirit Guardians going, this is going to stack in the exact same ways with that. And you're a druid, right? So you can cast Conjure Woodland Beings. That will stack as well. So you'd have to use your bonus action to keep moving the preserved land to move along with you, and then your Conjure Woodland Beings is an emanation from you, so it just moves with you. You could just be moving the land and yourself around, doing 5d8 force damage from Conjure Woodland Beings and 2d10 radiant damage from your preserved land, and do it twice per round. Like, that is a lot of stacking damage. And then the clerics doing their Spirit Guardians, same effect. So this is just because of the nature of the stacking, and it doesn't take concentration, you're putting it on top of emanations you may be causing, it's maybe too much. I think they need to back this up a bit. And also, having your speed is a confusing mechanic because of the order of operations, and a lot of effects just reduce a flat number of speed, -5, -10, -15, and then Spirit Guardians reduces by half as well. And how do those stack? What if they're in the area of Spirit Guardians and improved preservation? Is it 1/4? Does the halving stack? I think they need to add some clarification to that part of it too. They don't get rid of this. Okay, keep the concept, fix it in some way so that it's not too overpowered. Probably on the frequency with which it can trigger. That's probably the way to approach this. I wouldn't reduce the damage. I might even scale the damage by your Wisdom modifier or something, or something else. I don't know. Scale it a little bit up, but greatly reduce the frequency with which you can trigger the damage, because this is thematic, right? Right out of this second edition product called Defilers and Preservers, Wizards of Athos. Again, we're talking, this was Wizards, so this was a Wizard supplement for the second edition Dark Sun. They had a spell called Backlash that thematically was the same thing, right? The land would strike back against a Defiler. Now, it triggered on when a Defiler is attempting to draw energy from the land, and Defilers would do that either when they're memorizing spells or when they were casting the spell. And so in those 2 moments, if you cast this backlash on the land, and then the Defiler was trying to draw energy in that space, they would be hit for damage. So thematic and cool. I like the idea. So keep it. Don't remove it. Just fix how frequently it can trigger, or give it charges. I guess, I don't know, something like that. I don't love the charges idea though, because that's and I wouldn't use charges. Is not my favorite idea for fixing the preserved land 3rd level feature either, just because that's another thing for the player to track, right? They're tracking spell slots, they're tracking hit dice, they're tracking hit points, they're tracking all this stuff and conditions and buffs, and then add that on top of it for them to track. It's just a lot of stuff to be tracking, keep track of. So if I would find a way to reduce the frequency without charges, without tracking it, that would be my recommendation. Level 10, Facilitated Restoration. You can cast Lesser Restoration or Greater Restoration without expending a spell slot or requiring a spell component. You can use this feature to cast a spell in this way a number of times equal to your Wisdom modifier, minimum of once, and you regain all expended uses when you finish a long rest. So this is interesting because you can cast either the 2nd level spell or the 5th level spell, and it still uses one of these charges. That's essentially how this is working. You got, at this level, you should have like 5 charges because your Wisdom should be 20. And so you got 5 charges, and you can use a charge to cast either one of these spells. Now, if you were like me for a long time, when I was playing 5th edition, I assumed that Greater Restoration just did everything that Lesser Restoration did, plus some other things, and that's not the case. They just do completely different things. Lesser Restoration cures like lesser conditions, and Greater Restoration cures greater conditions, is how to think about it. So this is thematic, right? Restoring things. That's a that's a great theme for this class. Those are support functions because you're removing, it's really healing functions actually. If you're removing debuffs from allies, that's a healing function, but not bad to see that on here. And a bunch of extra castings of Greater Restoration is powerful. The problem I have with this is that this is very niche. Like my campaigns and the games I run, I see we can go several sessions without anybody casting a Lesser Restoration or Greater Restoration. And that's, when I say that, I mean anything that's like that either, right? So Paladins using Lay on Hands to cure poison, that doesn't happen every session either, even though people are getting poisoned. So people getting poisoned, usually players just kind of deal with it and keep going. They tend to not try to cure it. It does happen, but usually it's the Paladins, and the one campaign, they got 2 Paladins. But yeah, I think that this will feel like a dead feature for the player, and it's a bummer because at level 10, you came a long way. You didn't get any subclass features since level 6. You're not going to get another until level 14. So it's kind of a big gap, and you have this thing that kind of feels dead, where you rarely use it. It doesn't remove, it does remove the spell component. So that's a big, big bonus. For the Greater Restoration, because that's 500 gold pieces that it would consume every time you cast it. So that's a big bonus. Still, you don't cast Greater Restoration that often. If Greater Restoration, if they gave it some sort of like restore spell slots function, so you restore somebody's spell slots, which they're playing around with that idea. They gave that to, there's a Scion spell that does that. Maybe they should have given that to Greater Restoration. Anyway, that's a problem. And so I think what I would do instead is leave everything the same, but instead of restricting it specifically to Lesser Restoration or Greater Restoration, I would say let this cast any of the spells on your Circle of Preservation spell list. Whether it's a 1st level spell or 5th level spell, you cast it without a spell slot and no spell components, and you can do this Wisdom modifier times per day. So you get 5 castings of any of those 10 spells, and that's going to feel a lot more interesting. Now, those spells on that list, none of them are super powerful. Right? None of them are. There are a lot of support spells, a lot of healing spells, and so getting a bunch of free castings of those per day without spell components is okay, right? If they change up that spell list though and put like something crazy like Fireball on there, or Blight, or Synaptic Static, that might be First of all, that would be totally against the theme of this character, this subclass, but also that would be a different kind of power. With the spells I have on there though now, I think it would be just fine to do that. Just say you can cast any spell from your Circle spell list using this, no spell component, no spell slot. You can do that 5, Wisdom modifier times per day. In fact, they might even change it to say it's just 5 times a day and get rid of the Wisdom modifier, just to reduce the amount of complexity. But D&D Beyond handles that for you, so it's not really that big of a deal. And that's this is standard how they structure it. So probably convention. It's better to keep to convention than to take that off. Level 14, Sacrosanct land. The size of the cube created by your preserved land increases by a 30-foot cube. In addition, when a creature you can see in the area of your preserved land is hit by an attack roll, you can take a reaction to have the attack's damage against the creature. So if you're like me, when I first read this, I thought, oh, wow, that's kind of a bummer. All you do is increase the size of your cube, and then you have this uncanny dodge kind of effect as a secondary. That seems like a big letdown for level 14. But if you think about it, the area increase on your preserved land is if you're just talking in a two-dimensional plane, so just the flat plane of like a VTT or a table you're playing on, right? Because you can play in a third dimension, but let's just keep it at 2 dimensions for now. So the two-dimensional plane, that's a quadrupling of the area, right? You increase double the dimension, 1 dimension of a cube, and what you're doing is, the flat plane of it, you're quadrupling it. If it would be multiply if you talk about all 3 dimensions, so you're going vertical as well, and something's flying, you now multiplied the area by 8, right? I think I did that right. So that's a huge area increase. And by this level, the temporary hit points granted by your preserved land would give 1d4 plus 14 temporary hit points, and you're doing it at the end of every single ally's turn. You have 5 allies, you and 5 allies. That's 6 of you. You're doing this 6 times per round, granting every one of them temporary hit points or curing one of those conditions. You got 1,000 allies in range, if you can fit them, let's call it 100, then you're doing this 100 times per round. And that's the problem with the scaling of these kind of features, is it scales by number of creatures, not by in addition to everything else that it scales. So that is too much temporary hit points to be giving out that frequently to all these creatures. So you either need to reduce the scaling of the temporary hit points so it doesn't scale by your druid level, instead scale it by your wisdom modifier maybe, or they need to reduce the frequency by which it happens. And then the second part of this is, like an uncanny dodge. Use your reaction to have the damage from an attack. That's pretty weak. I don't know. I mean, once in a while you'd use this, but most of the time you'd be using your reaction for other things. You'd probably have a lot better reactions than this. There's a good chance you have the shield spell because you took Magic Initiate, or you multi-classed, or you have Silvery Barbs if your DM allows it. I do, or absorb elements. And you're worried about using your reaction, and attacks generally aren't a massive amount of damage in one shot. If you're talking about a huge amount of damage in one shot, it's more often things like spells or spell-like effects or saving throw type effects from monsters. So having a single attack's damage from you're level 14, so you reduce the damage from 30 to 15. You blocked 15 damage, you used your reaction, and then you get hit by Dragon's Breath for 100 damage, and you wish you still had your reaction for absorb elements, right? It's a tough trade-off. You'd use it sometimes, but it's never going to be exciting. So the second half is kind of a big bummer. The first half, though, combined with all that scaling, it's too much. And so my final rating for the subclass would be 1 thumbs up. Great theme, great flavor. Kudos for building and adding to the Druid subclass in areas that it wasn't already A rated at. So I love when they do that kind of a thing. And the power, but a thumbs down for the design related to the power level, right? Specifically the scaling of preserved land. And if they print it as is, I foresee the subclass getting banned by a lot of DMs or nerfed by the rest of them like I do, So please don't make us nerf it for you. Just right size that yourselves, WotC, so that we don't have to be the bad guys as DMs, and players can feel free to use it, okay? All right. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.